Secretary John Kerry, we really appreciate you spending time with us this morning. Thanks so much.
Delighted.
Yeah.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, Secretary Kerry, thank you again for coming in. So we've got the United States, Iran, and Israel. None of those three seems to know exactly what is in this 2-week ceasefire. Do you know what's in this 2-week ceasefire agreement?
No, and I think that's one of the obvious problems that we face with what's going on. It's remarkably loosey-goosey. Just one day after another, somebody announces we have this, we have that, and nobody knows on the other side whether they do or don't. It's shocking. Honestly, it's one of the reasons why I was willing to chat with you guys about it is I think it grows more serious and more dangerous.
Why do you say that?
On. Because the Straits of Hormuz are in the control of Iran.
Which they were not
Which
before
they were
this
not.
war started.
Which they were not before it started. And the threat to global economies of next steps which extend this war is just shuddering to think about. It may be larger, more complicated economic impact than we've ever dealt with. But leaving that aside for a minute, start at the beginning here. When you go to war, hopefully with the support of your people, and you have a defined threat, you have a clarity as to why you need to go to war. And equally importantly, I think we've learned through the years, you have allies. You have people supporting you because your cause is just, it's right. In this case, you have a war that is essentially fulfilling the long-held dream of Prime Minister Netanyahu to do as much damage to Iran as he is permitted to. He went to Obama. President Obama said no. He went to Biden. Biden said no. But he came to Trump, and Trump listened. And at the end of the comment, according to the article in the New York Times yesterday, he just says, sounds good to me. Well, the sounds good to me was a 4-point plan, essentially, that Bibi Netanyahu laid out about first we're going to bomb, then we're going to take out the leaders, then we're going to, take a change, and then the Iranian people are going to change everything. Please? What? No examination of exactly how you get there, what you do. And, I can remember when I was in the Senate and we had the loss of all those Marines because of the Covert barracks being thrown, being bombed, blown up. I think it was about 250 some Marines dead in one instant in that moment. That's back when Ronald Reagan, as a response to that, pulled them out. That's it. Okay. So let me be clear here. This war never had to happen, first of all, because the Iran nuclear agreement is the strongest nuclear agreement the United States or any country has made since the early days of the 1950s and 60s when we were engaged in arms control for a long period of time. It took a nuclear weapon off the table. It did. And when President Trump says this was a bad deal, I seriously doubt that he could recite one paragraph of what's in that deal or had a deep understanding about it. But the fact is that we had the most intrusive inspection process. There was not an element of, you have to trust the Iranians here. It was entirely based on verification, with the most intensive on-the-ground verification in the history of nonproliferation. And so...
And 98% of their enriched uranium was either removed or diluted as part of the deal, correct?
Yes, it was. And this deal that was put together, people don't talk, it's not talked about enough, had the consent and the full involvement and support of China, of Russia, of Germany, France, Britain, all of whom took part in the negotiations. And they believed their intel community, our intel community, the Israeli intel community said, don't pull out of this deal. It's working. Now, you may not like the deal. Some people just wanted to have a war and go at it and start ripping Iran apart. But, and by the way, let me just say an aside here. Yes, the United States military is the strongest in the world. Yes, it has the capacity to do amazing things. And we should all be very proud of what the United States has created, but not created for the purpose this president is putting it to.
Was there an imminent threat, Secretary, in your estimation?
No. No, there was not an imminent threat. An imminent threat would have been something that if they did something in 1 or 2 days, 3 days, a week, whatever, or maybe you can say a month. But Iran did not have the capacity. And by the way, Donald Trump himself stood up and bragged and said, we've obliterated their nuclear program.
End of last year.
So
yeah.
3 weeks, 4 weeks, a couple of months ago, you obliterate it. You don't need to do anything. And then you say, oh, we have a threat. We eliminate the nuclear program. There isn't one, not a notion possible to conjure up by which they could have made a nuclear weapon at this point in time. And by the way, when we cut the deal with Iran, and I'll never forget it. I was in a room alone with just Foreign Minister Zarif and myself and Foreign Minister Lavrov of Russia, because we needed to show that Russia was actually critically involved in providing the capacity to destroy the uranium. And China also helped in that, by the way. So we had a moment of incredible, extraordinary global cooperation to eliminate the capacity to have a nuclear weapon. Now, the Iranians, in order to make this happen, the Iranians destroyed thousands of centrifuges. That's what they were required to do. They did it. They destroyed a plutonium reactor that was 2 weeks away from being able to be deployed. And they filled the calandria, which is the center core of the reactor, with cement, so it could never be used again. They allowed us to bring in 130 additional inspectors on the ground in Tehran, in Isfahan, in Natanz. They were able to go in daily and inspect what was happening. We had radio seals on all of the exit and entry to the centrifuge, so you knew exactly if someone was monkeying with it. We had an ability we had television cameras put in their production facilities. We had daily inspections of various parts of the food chain imagine that today, given what's happened.
Well, Secretary Kerry, President Trump says that that the military will be inspecting the nuclear facilities, Isfahan and elsewhere, from the air because they're under a lot of rubble. Do you think that's possible?
Well, you can certainly see whether or not they're moving the rubble around and whether they're trying to dig down into it or something, unless they have some, tunnel deeper that comes at it from another place that we're not aware of. We really understand that facility pretty well, and we know where it is. We know exactly what has been happening to it. We limited their ability to enrich uranium. We limited it. We limited it to enrichment of 3.67%. And they had an amount they were limited in total, which would never allow them to make a bomb during that period, unless they broke out. Now, if they broke out, we had taken the breakout time from 2 weeks, 1 week. There were different, things the CIA might tell you or some other intelligence, but it was basically a couple of weeks. People said they could break out if they wanted to. We made that breakout period more than a year, about, something like a year plus 3 or 4 months. We had all the time in the world in those 3 or 4 months to be able to bomb them if we wanted to, if we needed to respond to their threat, to go back to the UN, to actually put back all the sanctions. And we had a process in place where, any of the participating nations had the ability to be able to bring a complaint, have that complaint thoroughly vetted, and if in the end Iran didn't move, immediate snapback of all the sanctions, and we would have been free to do what we have wound up doing now, which is taking out the physical capacity of those plants to
Well,
be
that's
able to.
why
What would have happened after 15 years, though? I mean, their ability to produce fuel after 15 years disappeared. That would be 2030, 4 years hence. What would have happened then, Secretary?
There were a couple of time frames within this agreement which had a so-called sunset clause. That clause would go away. What it did was it would take them from this extreme level of intrusiveness to relying on a more a mechanical sort of process. But it didn't go away. They still had to live by exactly all. I mean, we had lifetime television. We had lifetime inspections. We had lifetime. And by the way, Iran is a signatory to the Non-Proliferation Treaty. So as such, they were able to live by a certain set of rules. We took those and made them much stricter. All across the board, they had to live up to a much higher standard than any other country in the world to satisfy us, which it did, that we would have the ability to know what they were doing.
Well, that's why I think
we're talking to former Secretary of State John Kerry out here in our Brighton studio.
when you were just outlining having the inspectors, the international inspectors going in there and the cameras and all these things makes an average person like myself feel a lot more secure than watching what's happening from the air and not knowing even if all of the nuclear material is in one place and whether it's been moved all around the country. I have not heard anything, and maybe it's there and I don't know about it, but about actual physical inspections in any of these agreements.
Well, the physical inspections in terms of the agreement stopped because the president pulled out.
So they're over.
For the time, well, yeah, there's not much to inspect at this point in time, but there is an amount of uranium that is enriched that still needs to be accounted for and that should be taken out of the country. Now, that could happen, but it's only going to happen through a negotiation. And the negotiating process right now is, I can't tell you what, I mean, talk to nations around the world, to the leaders of these nations around the world. They're appalled. They are absolutely appalled. And they are, frankly, scratching their heads as to how it is that the United States could have a president or somebody leading them who makes these decisions, who has the ability to say something like he said on Sunday of Easter Sunday, that you're going to end a civilization, that you're going to bomb them into smithereens.
What was your reaction when you heard that?
Utter shock and as deeply just concerned as I've been at any point in time when you start using expletives on Easter Sunday with a threat to end civilization, which on itself is threatening a war crime. Because that's something the international law couldn't be more clear about. I mean, you look at what happened with the war crimes committed against Jews, where 6 million people were annihilated in the context of in the Holocaust, and here you have a president of the United States promising to absolutely shred civilization in a place of 90 million people, which has a history that is so different from what Donald Trump is describing today. There is the theocracy, a terrible regime. None of us, nobody I know, likes the regime for the way it treats people, for the way its history. But Iran, writ large, the people want something different. And yet the president threatened to just annihilate everybody. And a lot of civilians are dying in the context of what is happening now. So, but Iran's history never gets mentioned in the context of this. The Iranian people love America and they love Americans. And there are a whole bunch of them living here in the United States of America today. And they are part of a history. Persians. This is a place where algebra was created. And chess. And which they play a hell of a lot better, obviously, than the current administration.
I did not know that.
Yes. I mean, this is an amazing civilization in art, in music, in culture. And he just lumps it into one pile. And I think, unfortunately, those folks are now going to have a much tougher situation because the hammer and the fist have come down on them. They've killed a lot of people.
Is this regime stronger today, despite the eradication of some military capacity?
Here's what the regime has done. And many of us warned that the Iranians, and I saw this over 4 years. I mean, look, Iran. Right now, the president has been negotiating for a matter of months. And it's very hard to tell what's really on the table and what isn't. It's sporadic, and their strategy is not really clear. But here's what he's done. He's taken that process, and now it doesn't exist at all. You have a group of people who have survived the massive bombing, survived the killing of the core group of its leadership. And they're still there and still fighting and still able to fight. That should tell people that the Iranians have a special capacity, which I warned of and others have warned of, not me alone, that they know how to do what's called asymmetrical warfare. So U.S. does this, and then you think about what the options are going to be, but evidently we didn't think about all the options because the President of the United States himself has stood up and said, oh, we didn't expect that. Who would have thought that they would have closed the Straits of Hormuz? Are you kidding me? Who would have thought of it? Every CIA, every military analyst who's been assigned to this file, all of them knew that was a possibility.
You've heard Hegseth's comments about, of course, we anticipated that. Do you have any evidence, a veteran chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee, obviously Secretary of State, do you have any evidence that either Trump or Hegseth has any idea what they're doing vis-a-vis Iran?
I think there's a strategic gap here that is more significant than any I saw under any presidency while I was in public life. It's quite staggering what they are. And the Secretary of Defense talks in terms that are childish and basically like he's advertising for a Friday night fight, something. It's just amazing to me. And I don't think it has earned respect in many of the quarters of the world where you need to bring people to the table in order to solve the problem. This can only be resolved with negotiation and diplomacy. And now it's going to be much harder to put the Hormuz passage into a place where you have a reasonable outcome. That's going to be very complicated because I don't think the president is prepared to or wants to wind up codifying for the long term here a situation where it's worse off than it was before he began. And that's where we're heading.
Because as of this morning, there's only a trickle of that getting through the Strait of Hormuz. It's not opened as we thought was going to happen with a ceasefire. But I want to ask you, we have Vice President Vance, Jared Kushner, and Steve Witkoff, real estate guy, man, going over to negotiate in Islamabad, supposedly on Saturday. And Brent McGurk, one of the diplomats that you
Brent
worked
worked
with,
very closely with our team.
Yes, I heard him say this morning that since the strait is not open, that we shouldn't be negotiating. And it makes some of us concerned that I hope they have a bunch of real diplomats with them, that it's not going to be Vance, Kushner, and Witkoff, because Witkoff has made some bad mistakes vis-a-vis Vladimir Putin in the past, negotiating this whole thing. So two things. Should they negotiate at all? And do we know if they have other people who know Iran?
Well, I don't know. I can't speak to what the composition is or who's there or what their what their strategy is. They've certainly never called to chat with me or a lot of other people who have pretty fair knowledge of this. I mean, I worked on this for 4 years, maybe 4.5 years. I began as chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and I was working quietly, very much keeping President Obama and Secretary Clinton appraised of what it was, and only doing it with their understanding and consent, because we wanted to explore what are the possibilities here. Before you decide you're going to go to war, you got to exhaust the possibilities. That's premise number one, for which by which you consider whether or not you're going to start a war or be involved in a war. And so, Marjorie, we spent 2 years just feeling it out, getting to a point through very careful secret diplomacy, quiet diplomacy, where we built relationships and we did some things that gave people confidence that step one can lead to step two and so forth. That hasn't happened here. And I think, the rush to war really got cemented when Prime Minister Netanyahu came over and met with the president and asked for the very same thing he'd fundamentally asked of President Obama and President Biden.
Can we spend a minute on something that I think is good news? You, Bill McKibben, and Marjorie Egan, a good troika, I should say, have all said the same thing in the last week, and I'll paraphrase. Bill was with us last week or a few days before that after the war started, that the one positive that may come out of this is people's embrace of, Bill doesn't call it alternative energy anymore because it's cheaper, but of clean energy will probably spike. Is that a hope, or do you believe that's going to happen?
No, it will happen. It will happen partly inevitably, Jim, because you have a transition that is happening globally now. This is not something, it's not passing fancy. Clean energy, renewable energy is the future. And I think the Wall Street Journal had a story about 2 months ago. Headline was, "The energy transition is now unstoppable." That's in the Wall Street Journal. Bloomberg in Davos had another story that said that the banner was, you know who believes in climate change? Big headline. The stock market.
Yeah.
And if you read the stock, you look at I'm now involved in an investor group, and we're trying to accelerate the energy transition. That's all we focus on in this. But we're trying to prove to people you can actually make money in this transition. And there are amazing things happening in around the world now. Fusion, we're getting closer and closer to perhaps fusion energy, form of nuclear, but not with the other challenges. We have geothermal definitely coming on strong. It's technology that was taken from drilling, so it comes out of the oil and gas industry. But 85% of the people working at this plant in Utah now, where they're building a prototype of delivery of energy that's going to be geothermal, 85% of them came out of that other industry. So there's job transition, there's energy transition, and the United States under the not
Almost
leadership.
said leadership, yeah.
Yeah, I almost said leadership. It's the opposite of it. Under their myopic, remarkably dangerous, damaging, self-isolating decision to hate wind because somebody built it off his golf course in Scotland. He didn't like it. And this is guiding the policy of the United States. So regrettably, but wind and solar are now the cheapest forms of energy in the world. And in Texas, there's more deployment of wind than anywhere else in the United States. You have a Republican governor, 2 Republican senators, and they're not changing the policy, but Donald Trump rails against wind. What they get out of it in Texas, Texas has its own grid. It's the only state in the United States that has its own grid. And so they're managing it by deploying renewables. And through the deployment of those renewables, they're able to lower the price of the delivery of energy and make it more secure. So I think this is going to happen. The battle to prevent the worst consequences of the climate crisis will be won, but the issue is will be won too late.
Yeah.
That's the challenge now.
But the war is going to add juice to this. I remember you of the first Earth Day in 1970. Obviously, as a 20-something-year-old, one of the key
that was the
organizers.
first thing that I became involved in.
And despite all the wonderful advocacy, End of Nature with McKibben and you, this war is, I hate to use the pun, fueling essentially even an extra bump. Is it not for people who are seeing extraordinary gas prices?
Absolutely. Well, it's worse than that. Our emissions have gone up.
Yeah.
I led the negotiations in Paris, in Glasgow, Sharm el-Sheikh, and then finally in Dubai. 195 nations came together. And that's, by the way, the hardest diplomacy there is because you have to do it by consensus. So one nation can stand up and say, I'm not going along with this, and the whole thing fails. We came out of Dubai with 195 nations, including 52 oil and gas nations, signing up and saying, we must transition away from fossil fuel so as to achieve net zero by 2050, according to the science, which meant 1.5 degrees, and finally, accelerating in this decade. And we've called for a tripling of the deployment of renewables, a doubling of energy efficiency, and a tripling of nuclear. Nothing. There are more emissions going up. And globally, people have taken Trump's cue and just taken advantage of it. It's okay, well, they're not spending the money. We're not going to spend the money. If they're not going to push their population, we're not going to push our population.
But China is.
China is raging ahead, but not for environmental reasons. China has exclusively decided, they made the decision in 2019, that they are going to deploy that they needed energy independence, the very thing you just raised in the question. They made the decision based on their security and based on the marketplace. Yeah. And they wanted to control the marketplace, which they do now. China has deployed more renewables than all of the rest of the world put together and manufactured them.
So John Kerry,
We're just hurting ourselves. We're
lagging behind.
Our political system right now in America is stepping on itself. We are our own worst opponent in a sense because we're not making smart long-term decisions. We're not investing in the future of the country in the way we should be. And now we're engaged in a war we didn't have to get into.
does that
That's gonna
democracy
cost
you're
us more.
talking about survive 2.5 more years of this president?
I think I think the key is obviously going to be the midterms and what happens in those midterms. I think that's the key answer to that question.
You know, Secretary, if I can, you've mentioned allies and working with other countries in several contexts. I saw the head of NATO after he left his meeting, the General Secretary of NATO, after he left the meeting, go right to CNN and talk to Jake Tapper, and he looked like he was suffering from Stockholm Syndrome. Jake Tapper asked him, I'd say 5 times, did the president ever say to you that he wanted to withdraw from NATO? And he avoided the question all 5 times. Is the damage we've done with our allies, not just in the days prior to Iran, but particularly what's happened here, not consulting them and then demanding that they get involved to help us, even though, quote, we don't need them. How long-lasting is this damage that Trump has done to those
It's going to be
relationships?
more long-lasting than it was in the first term. And I became the climate envoy during that 4-year period with President Biden, and I ran into a lot of the residual, in various parts of the world, and people would say, "Why should we do? You guys might elect him again," or so people think about it and they
What's
worry
the
about
answer to
it.
that? What do you say to them?
Well, I think I gave them what I think is an appropriate technical answer to that question, which is, so what has really happened to us in terms of our moving forward on dealing with climate? Because that was my portfolio at that point. And I can tell you that in the first term of President Trump, 75% of the new electricity that came online in America was renewable. It was clean. Now it's 90%, even under Trump. Why is that? Because the marketplace decision of people, CEOs are not going to go out and say, well, I'm a MAGA guy, therefore I'm going to pay more, and you shareholders are going to get less. Not happening. And the amount of money that they're investing in this transition is continuing. And so they know this is temporary and we're going to get through it. I think we do get through it. I think that, and yes, it can be reversed and become a part of history, but we will never have quite the same freedom to refer to our role in World War II or to refer to the leadership we've provided in many other ways. People will have doubts for quite some period of time.
So, Secretary Kerry, getting back to Iran, I mean, I'm not asking you to fix this, but we're in a mess now. Israel was bombing Lebanon yesterday, claiming that Lebanon was not supposed to be in the ceasefire. Trump is claiming Lebanon was not supposed to be in the ceasefire, even though Pakistan said it was in the ceasefire. The strait's not open. We're in a mess. What do we do? Do you have any
let me
thoughts?
explain to you. When we finally got an agreement on the Iran nuclear file, when we had finished our negotiations after months, I mean, I spent 3 solid weeks in Vienna.
2 weeks doesn't seem enough.
No, this is at the very end, after we spent 4 years. Remember, we led up
2
to
weeks
this.
for Trump doesn't seem enough.
Oh, no, but they just throw this stuff out there. We're going to do this in this period of time, but they haven't had the conversations. They haven't worked through. This is tough stuff. I mean, how do you really pin down the elements of the ceasefire, et cetera, is not easy. And I don't think they either of the put out any paper on it. I don't think that they released something where there was a joint statement.
They didn't.
That's what we did. We did joint statements. We agreed on every word in there. And we agreed exactly on what would happen after, for instance, when we finished the Iran nuclear agreement, the certain sanctions were lifted. Blah, blah, blah. That was part of the agreement. We laid out everything that we would do. And we didn't leave it up in the sky. People complain. I've heard the president say 100 times, we gave them cash. We turned around and gave them money.
Can you explain that, by the way? We were going to ask you this later. We hear this all the time.
Yeah.
Explain that, please, if you will, Secretary.
Happy to explain it. The American taxpayer was paying already somewhat to Iran because there had been a deal for the sale of weapons in the 1980s, and they didn't get them.
$400 million, right?
So they went to court, and guess what? They won their case in court that the United States would have to pay interest to them for the money that was owed, and that they were owed the money back because they never got the weapons. So people should be thrilled they didn't get the weapons at this point in time. But more importantly, it was their money, and it was coming from the American taxpayer, and the American taxpayer would have had to pay more and more and more if we didn't sort of cut the Gordian cord, rip the Band-Aid off, put the money out there. It's their money. We don't want our taxpayers paying even more, and there's no way to change that ruling because it was appealed all the way up, and that's the way it was. So it wasn't as if people get, and the money given to them was fractional compared to what they're already spending, already had done in other ways. So it really didn't change the balance of anything in the region.
You know, the Secretary, most Americans met you, obviously, when you came back from Vietnam. I looked up this morning, I'm sure you know the statistics, there are 100 veterans
That
in
I was
Congress.
younger then? Yes, I was.
There are 100 veterans in Congress out of 535, and we have a guy with bone spurs in the White House. How difficult is it for this country's government, but including Trump and without Trump, to deal with some of these issues when so few of the decision makers have served the country?
Well, it makes a huge difference that more people have not spent time in the military. I mean, on many different scores. Obviously, I opposed the war, and that's now well known. But I love the Navy. Love what it taught me. It was a graduate school in leadership, and I think that that the folks who are there, who have served, usually bring those qualities to the table, which are not unimportant at all. When I was first in the Senate with Ronald Reagan as president, there was a magic in the relationship, the personal relationship between a Bob Dole and a Danny Inouye, or Ted Stevens, or Judge Hal Heflin from Alabama, who'd won a Silver Star and done great things. And these guys
later
delivered
there
that
was
way.
a John Kerry and a John McCain, too, I should say.
Yeah, John McCain and I became really good friends, and we traveled back to Vietnam many times together. And we for 10 years, we worked to try to literally end the war here at home, because people were still at war with each other. You remember Newsweek magazine, Are They Still Alive?
Yeah.
In tiger cages. And it stood in the way of our moving to a new relationship. So John and I literally sat on a U.S. Air Force plane flying to Kuwait to thank the troops, the Big Red One and others who had liberated Kuwait. And an amazing, experience with Pat Moynihan and Strom Thurmond was then the chair of the Republicans who were in command of the Senate. And we flew over, and John and I were seated by seniority, facing each other. And there was a little tension because we hadn't really talked. So we did talk that night. We literally talked into the night. And I asked him about his war and the imprisonment and this and that. He asked me about the riverboats and the things, And in the end, we decided, let's work together on something. Let's find a way to work together. And we did. And we held the hearings. We, finally got a report out of the U.S. Senate. People like Bob Kerry, Chuck Robb, Nancy Kassenbaum, a whole group of senators who are serious people, Chuck Robb, many of whom, a number of whom had served in Vietnam. Mm-hmm. And they all knew this was the road to go, that we had to examine the evidence, see if there was possibility anybody was there. And if there wasn't, then we were free in conscience to move forward. And that's exactly what we did last year, the year before Trump came in. President Biden, I was privileged to be with the president in Hanoi for a visit that he did where we articulated to the world a strategic relationship between Vietnam and the United States. Who would have thought that?
So as I said before, what do we do now? I mean, the
Well, we
strait's
have
closed,
to hope, honestly,
the nukes are still
Marjorie,
there.
This war would be so many times more costly and dangerous, depending on what happens with the Straits of Hormuz. And that threat still hangs over us right now. It's a dangerous moment. We need the president and his team to want to make peace more than they want to make war. And they need to understand that that's the only way they're going to be able to work towards a different kind of relationship here. There's our bet. I'm going to go backwards for a moment, I acknowledge. But in the Iran nuclear agreement that we came to, we know there were, possibilities that Iran might try to cheat. But we had a very clear process for what you would engage in and do in order to show the cheating. And we never vouched for the fact that they might not do that. We said, yeah, they might decide, despite all the layers we've put in place, to try to cheat. But we had confidence. Our intel community, the Defense Intelligence Agency, the Central Intelligence Agency, the FBI, the Homeland Security, all the players who came to the table. Ernie Moniz, who came, I asked him to come in and join us because of the technical components. And Ernie is a nuclear physicist, MIT, did a brilliant job in helping to sort through things. And partly because Ernie went to MIT, their lead technical guy also had been at MIT. So you have this incredible ability, respect for MIT and respect for facts and truth. That helped us to lay out a process whereby, onerous as it was for them, and it was, we really came in and said, we can't do this agreement if we can't turn to our citizens and know we're protecting them and we're going to discover something. So you may want to cheat, but we're going to find you. And if you do, here's what we're going to do. We had the right to go back and have all the sanctions come back. We had the right to go to the UN. We had one country could take you to the UN, to an accelerated process where you would be able to hold them accountable. So I really think you have to underscore to people, what are the stakes here? Is this really worth, given where we know we were once with Iran, do we want to widen this war and have a global recession and have people who are already, average folks who are struggling to pay their bills, send their kids to school, put food on the table, all those things. It is tougher now. And that inflation is going to continue to go up even more. It'll skyrocket. You'll have rationing of gas, not of gas, but the United States produces its own gas. So we're lucky. We're in the best position. But other folks who depend on us, and we depend on them also because of various agreements and treaties and other things, we need the cooperation. So you've got to remember that we had this. The genie was in the bottle, and Trump let it out. There was no nuclear threat to the United States.
How fast do you think he would sign that agreement if it was offered by Iran right now?
It wouldn't be the same. He's going to find something that makes him say, I won something different, and it's better than this or that.
But it sounds like you're saying that we should let Iran keep the Strait of Hormuz to get to peace.
Okay. No.
Okay.
That it wasn't sort of asserted as an asset that was somehow collecting, a payment for people to be able to go by. It was a free passageway because it's international.
National waters, yeah.
And it has to be international and free.
So we have to get that back.
So you have to.
Okay.
That has to be part of the agreement, that it'll have some kind of structure. But what Iran has now been allowed to discover is, hey, we don't need a nuclear weapon. We've got the Straits of Hormuz.
Exactly.
We'll just shut them down on energy. So you have to find a way now to resolve this in the longer term. For the short term, you need to get a legitimate understanding regarding a ceasefire, a legitimate process for negotiations, a legitimate maybe outline of the goals of what you're trying to achieve.
So
but it sounds like you're saying
to
get to peace, we need to be able to we have to give up something. The United States does. And what is that we have to give up, do you think?
I don't look on it as giving up. I look on it as respecting something that's already been in agreement and reality, which is they've signed the NPT. They were adhering to it. They've signed and lived by the additional protocol. The additional protocol does what the NPT doesn't.
On the nuclear
NPT,
enrichment.
Correct.
Yes.
Which means you can challenge, you can go in,
Okay.
you can inspect and have accountability. And then beyond the additional protocol. We put a whole lot of constraints on them that are very, very significant about how much they can enrich, over what period of time, what they have to do to allow us in to make certain that they're not cheating, which is the most intrusive inspection in the world, and they had agreed to do that. So they're going to have to come back with an agreement that we can say to Israel, you are protected. You can say to the world, this is not a threat. Those are legitimate things to be concerned about, but you can't be, beyond a level of agreed upon reasonableness. That's what negotiating is. Everybody has something they don't like, but you're getting the fundamentals of what you have to do in order to move on. And over the long run, you have to have a policy where you're going to begin to try to build relationships in the region. Now, here's the difficulty. There are countries now dividing within the Middle East as to what they think ought to be done to guarantee the freedom of the Straits of Hormuz. And that's going to be a real challenge, because if you have 2 or 3 Arab countries saying, no, you got to go wipe them out and do this or that, then we're in for,
which they want
But it
us to
seems,
do.
if I may, it seems, at least as of the moment, we're only one day in, Secretary, and it seems that part of the, if not the primary reason that Iran has backed off opening the strait is because, as Marjorie said, their belief, they say their belief, and Pakistan's belief as well, was the ceasefire deal included Israel stopping the bombing of Beirut, where close to 20% of the population, 1 million people, have been displaced. We read the same article you did, and people don't know what we're referencing when the Secretary mentioned the piece in the Time. Maggie Haberman and Jonathan Swan have written a book, a chapter about the meeting with Netanyahu, and the Situation Room was there. And I have to say, my takeaway is that Netanyahu led Trump around by the nose in that meeting. I'm curious what your takeaway is. But if that's fair, does Donald Trump have the power to call Netanyahu on the phone and say, you got to stop the bombing of Lebanon or this whole thing comes apart?
Well, first of all, I'm not going to characterize a conversation that I wasn't part of.
Okay.
I don't know what was said there or what wasn't. And secondly, I think that it's really critical to put these things in writing and to articulate them jointly. When you have tweets going out, and that's how you're announcing policy, as important as this, and you've got a 10-point plan, but then you've got a 15-point plan, and you don't really know which one contains what, because none of us have seen the actual plan. And Trump says you won't see the actual plan. Well, that's fine. President has every right in the world to negotiate privately and secret, whatever. But the key is to make sure they really are locked into the implications of the outcome here, that they don't misread what Iran is willing or able to do. Iran has had its major leadership wiped out. They're still fighting. They've still been able to organize the military to do this. They've been able to organize to take the straits and assert them in this way. So clearly, there's not a quote regime change in the sense that they originally thought there would be. You got the Ayatollah's son, and a whole other group of people have come along who are, I'm told, tougher in some ways, ready to just stay at it. They've obviously stopped whatever movement there was in the population to, rebel, to assert their aspirations differently. So that's another piece off the table for what was anticipated. Bibi said to the president, this is what's going to happen, and then they'll rise up against them, and we have a new regime, a whole new Middle East. Well, we don't. And it's clear that it's going to be extremely costly. And most Americans are opposed to fighting a war in that region. They don't want to do this.
But does Trump, if he chose to, have the power to tell Netanyahu to stop the bombing?
He has the power.
Lebanon?
I think if they have as special a relationship as has been asserted, I would think that he should be able to elicit that. But I think Prime Minister Netanyahu has a different agenda, to be honest with you.
Which is regime change.
No, which is, not just regime change. He has set a target with respect to Hamas, which has not been yet reached. So that war will continue. And, you know, the question is he willing to rein in his broader goals here? And I'm not sure that he is.
Well, it looks again to me that he is willing to bomb great parts of Lebanon that where civilians are. I mean, that happened in Beirut, which is what he did in Gaza.
But yeah, indeed. And I think there's a misinterpretation here about what happens ultimately with bombing. You can't bomb away knowledge in the heads of scientists who now have mastered the nuclear cycle. So, you know, we all want Israel to be secure, completely and totally. We want all those countries to be secure. We want them to live in a harmony, which peace actually represents. You know, harmony is more than just the absence of bomb. I mean, you know, peace is more than the absence of bombs and fighting. Peace is a state of engagement between countries and peoples. And, you know, right now, I don't see that there's an appetite for that in the prime minister. Maybe there is in other people, but it doesn't appear that he is ready for that.
So luckily for you, Secretary, you only have 3 more months you have to endure with us in the studio. Two things, if I may.
2 more minutes, Jim.
If you were still in the same...
3 months?
Minutes. He meant minutes.
No, it feels like 3 months. I think
told
it
you.
was his point.
Told you, free.
Yeah, once you
Kerry.
get here, you can't get out.
So before we do have free Kerry, you spent a decent amount of time in the Senate. As I'm sure you know, 50-plus Democrats are talking about invoking the 25th Amendment, which would lead to the removal of the president. Would you have supported it had you still been in the Senate?
Again, listen, I've learned one thing: don't get into hypotheticals. In principle, I think. Well, first of all, the cabinet has to raise the issue, not the Senate. Mm-hmm. But the Senate's putting it on the table, which is not inappropriate. I'll tell you this: in Europe, the newspapers, the news media, are filled with politicians and observers and commentators and everybody wondering what has happened to the United States of America that you can have an Easter message like we had from this president talking about annihilating civilization. And that is not, I don't think, anywhere in the history of our nation have we seen that kind of rupture with the spirit of our country, with the reality of our country, with our Constitution, with everything that we stand for. So this is a very real challenge, this question of the president's state of mind and president's capacity to be able to make the peace that is necessary here.
So before you go, you say you don't answer hypotheticals. We only have a minute left. This is not a hypothetical. There was a guy a couple of years ago who called our show. He said he was John from Cambridge. And the person that answered the phone said, "What do you want to talk about?" And the person who was calling said, "This is actually John Kerry, former Secretary of State." And our call screener did not believe that it was actually the former Secretary of State.
Couldn't get on.
Did that leave a sour taste in your mouth, Mr. Secretary?
So what the hell has happened?
Leading the world and then can't make a call into some pathetic little radio show.
Well,
It's sad, right?
You've got more security here than most people. So.
That's right.